So we've been hiking for years, and by hiking I don't mean the sort of little strolls in the local woods like this, but actually going up reasonable peaks in national parks, that sort of thing. And when we started, it turns out there's quite a lot of stuff we didn't know, and it caused us all sorts of problems, because you think, well, hey, it's just a walk in a park, it's just a bit higher, a bit longer, and then you discover that actually it's not quite like that, and there's certain things that if I'd have known them at the start, it would have just made it a lot more pleasurable, and possibly less painful. So I thought what I'd do is just put down some of these things that I've learnt over the years, just so that anyone who maybe gets invited to their friends for the first time to go hiking up in the Lake District or someone like that, actually has a more enjoyable experience and is a bit more prepared for it. So first I'm going to talk about gear, and mainly clothing. So the first thing to think about is, what are you going to wear when you're going to go on your hike? And when you go to a lot of these places, for example in the Lake District in North Wales, you can be in the village, it's a beautiful sunny day, and people are in t-shirts and shorts and flip-flops, and the weather's perfect for it. But there's two problems there. There's one, in these sort of mountainous regions, the weather rarely stays like that, and when you're going on a walk that could take you 6 hours, you're likely to end up in different types of weather just because you're spending time out in it. The second problem is altitude, and the weather you get down in the valley can be completely different to what you experience on the summit. Down in the valley, you've got a lot of shelter, there's hardly any wind. You get out onto the summit and it can be blowing a gale. And I've had it before where I've come off a mountain and I've got all the gear on, I'm soaking wet, and then you're walking around, you get down to the village, you're walking around, and people are undoubtedly looking at you as if you're from an alien planet, because to them it's a beautiful sunny day. Now, another consideration, apart from the weather changing and just being different at the top, is that while you are actually moving, you're expending energy, and when you're climbing up a hill, you are getting hot doing it. So you need to ensure you've got clothing that can allow you to, you're not going to get too sweaty, you're not going to dehydrate. But also the opposite is true. When you do stop, you stop to have a break, you get to the summit, and worst case scenario, you stop because you're injured. You could spend a load of time stationary, and I can tell you from experience, all that heat that you've built up soon disappears, and you soon start to feel cold. So you do need to ensure that with you, you've got clothing that you can quickly add on in layers as you start to, as the temperature changes, as you start to get cold, or you can take off in layers as you start to go back uphill and start to get hot again. Now, I guess one of the most important things people think about, or should think about, is what is going to be on their feet. Now, my recommendation is to get some walking boots. They don't need to be hugely expensive ones. I would avoid the temptation to rush out and get ones with which are really tall. They might look really cool, but you could end up rubbing your leg. And I'd avoid the temptation to say, oh, I've got these nice trainers, I'll wear them. They're probably not going to be waterproof. They're just probably not going to be up to the job. And at the other extreme, I would not hike in Wellingtons. I don't use Wellingtons a lot, but I know my wife has experience using Wellingtons as opposed to using walking boots, and she says, no, I would never properly walk in Wellingtons. They're just not good for your feet for that sort of thing. They're not breathable like proper boots are. They're just not designed for the job. So it's certainly worth investing in some proper walking boots. But again, don't spend an absolute fortune. Oh yes, and if you're experienced and you know it's not going to be muddy or at least deep mud and a lot of water, then yes, you can go with a hiking shoe rather than a boot. So I tend to wear those a lot in the summer, but not if I'm going up proper fells where there's always a lot of water. Also, boots need to be worn in. So don't go. If you're going with your friends, you're going up to, say, the Lake District, don't say, oh, well, I'll just drop into this walking shop in Keswick and I'll buy a set of brand new boots and then we'll go up Scafell Pike in them. They are going to kill your feet within the first mile. So what you need to do is buy some weeks in advance, initially wear them around the house, and most of the shoe shops selling these will exchange them if you've only worn them in the house, and they'll often tell you to try them in the house first, and then if they don't really suit your feet, you can take them back. Once you've worn them outside, that's it, they're yours. Once you've tried them out in the house, you've worn them around in the house, they're starting to get a little bit comfortable, then you can start using just on them on normal day-to-day tasks, going down the shops, that sort of thing, and eventually on local walks of a few miles. Obviously, what you don't want to do is just prior to your walking holiday, go mad and do some big walk in new boots and then end up with blisters that are going to take a long time to heal. So work your way up to it. But again, don't get too hung up with the latest, most expensive walking boots. The most important thing is go into a shop, try a load of them, find what is most comfortable for you, and take some thick walking socks with you. If you don't have them, the shoe shops can supply some. They'll often say, oh, would you like to try some walking socks with this? So because you need sort of a bit of extra padding, and you tend to buy boots that are maybe a half size to a size larger than your normal footwear, just to allow for that. Also, your feet can swell during a walk, so you need to allow make some allowance there. So I would also say definitely go into a physical shop, one that's local to you, so you can take them back if you have a problem, and try them on there. And ideally one that is a proper walking shop, or a shop that sells proper outdoor gear, and where they've got someone who's an expert in this. You can use their expertise. Just don't go straight onto the internet and buy some on the internet. Now, I always like leather walking boots. As long as you keep them waxed, then the leather can last a long time, and it's got to be waxed to remain supple. So there's various models of wax that you can buy from the shoe shops that will do the trick. You can get a lot of these that look slightly more fashionable. They've got sort of synthetic materials. They look great, but I've just find that they soon clog up with mud, and the mud can do damage to them. It's more difficult to clean them. Whereas the leather ones, they maybe look a bit old-fashioned, but they do the trick. So once you've considered what footwear to purchase, the next thing you need to think about is a coat. Again, you don't need to get really fancy on this, but you'll definitely need one, even when it's sunny, because if it might be, as I said, sunny and warm down in the valley. Once you get up to the top, it can change very quickly, and it's a whole different thing. And you need something that's going to keep the wind off you. So a fleece, might help with insulation, but it's not really going to be windproof. And of course, the moment it starts raining, it's no good at all. I'd avoid the temptation to go for lined coats, the sort of traditional winter coat with a nice fleecy lining, because in many circumstances, you're going to be walking up a steep hill, you're going to be getting really hot, and it's going to be raining at the same time. So it's just going to be too hot for you to wear an insulated coat in order to keep the rain off you and to hike up a steep mountain. So what I tend to buy is coats which don't have any sort of insulation layer, because you can always wear multiple fleeces or layers underneath, and that's the ideal thing to do. Is I like layers that you can unzip completely, so you can unzip them to get lots of air in. You can zip them up as the wind changes direction. You round sort of a buttress of rock, and suddenly there's cold wind blowing at you, and you can put a hood up. But if you've got multiple layers, then, and you can really easily strip them off as well. One thing I like on outdoor coats is zips. I want plenty of zipped pockets, so always look for that, because you always need somewhere to put stuff without having to take your backpack off and go in there and put it back on again. but make sure they're zipped pockets. You don't want ones with little poppers where things fall out of, because you might be quickly taking the coat off, putting it back on, and the last thing you want to do is get down a mountain and you can't find your car keys. You don't want to retrace that looking for your car keys. The other useful thing you'll get on some sort of more serious coats is pit zips. So they're a zip under here, and because it's sort of sheltered under here, you can, when it's raining and it's warm, but you're getting hot because you're going up mountain, you can unzip them either side, and you get ventilation of air going through, but without having to completely unzip the whole coat, meaning that you would get wet from the rain. So they're quite useful. A good outdoor coat should also have a hood on it, and it should be a hood where you can adjust it. I mean, I've got a mountaineering jacket, and actually it's quite a big hood, but you can then pull various toggles to pull it in so that it closely fits around your face, because again, you're often going to be walking into the wind, so there's no point having a big hood that will blow off. The reason the hood's big on that jacket is because it's actually designed for climbing use, to be able to release everything, fit it over a climbing helmet. I tend to like to buy these breathable jackets or coats which have got a breathable membrane in them. Gore-Tex is an example. It's probably the best known example of that. But Gore-Tex coats can be very expensive. You don't need to go for that brand, although it's a very popular one. You'll find that actually some of the cheaper brands of coats have their own brand of breathable membrane. So it's often a sort of white material that's sewn in, which is designed so that it lets moisture evaporate out, and some air to breathe through, but the holes in it are too small to allow rain through. And that is behind what they call the durable waterproof coating, which is that sort of outer layer that we always see on coats. But I wouldn't get too worried about this, because you can spend a lot of money on some of these coats, and in my experience, they're not brilliant. They just don't work that well. The idea is the expectation is that you're in a big rainstorm and you're going to be able to zip this all up to prevent any water getting on you, and you're going to be able to climb up a mountain. But what actually happens is that when the water is getting on the surface of these coats, they won't breathe anyway, and you'll just end up sweating into these coats, and so you end up soaking wet anyway. So there's some compromise to be made, and so I wouldn't spend an absolute fortune on one. Now, I suggest in the backpack taking some sort of woolen hat. It's one of those things I'm not really fussed about what it is. They all seem to do the trick for me, so I wouldn't get too technical. I think one of those I just bought from a petrol station. Also, so that's useful, keep it in the backpack. In summer, it's useful having just like a peak cap, baseball cap. Just keeps the sun off of your eyes and just gives you a little bit of shade. There's very little shade. You can spend all day up on one of these fells and get quite a lot of sun, so take that into account. I also always like to keep gloves in the pockets of my coat, because your hands get cold very quickly when you're in the wind, and when you've got cold hands, you can't manipulate things, you struggle with zips, you struggle with navigation aids, and again, gloves are one of these things I'm not particularly fussed about. I won't buy a really expensive brand. I want something that's full fingered. I don't like fingerless gloves because the ends of my fingers get cold, and I can always take a glove off to do something and then put it back on to warm my hand up. Ideally get something that's windproof and a bit waterproof, but again, you can always put your hands in your pockets. I wouldn't buy sort of little woolen gloves because they're just going to get soaking wet straight away, and wet gloves are just going to wick heat away from your hand. They're actually going to be colder than wearing none at all. I recommend getting a backpack if you don't have one. You don't, again, have to spend a fortune on them. You can get backpacks which have straps that clip together here and at the waist. That's actually quite useful because if you have to clamber over something, then it's not falling off all the time. You're not having to keep adjusting it. We tend to, for most of our hiking, just have quite a small 25-litre backpack, but you can have a much larger one like the orange one here, which is not this is not sort of a big one for camping in, but it's sort of a bigger day pack. It's obviously useful to have pockets on the outside where you can put things like compasses and mobile phones, stuff like you need to get to. It can be quite useful just to have one big pocket on the inside, because you can then stuff all sorts of things down there. You can stuff coats down there, stuff fleeces down there as you get hot, and then you can pull them all out, as opposed to the type you might have for, say, school, where you've got lots of different dividers. Also, if it doesn't come with a rain cover, because generally backpacks are not waterproof, you can buy these cheaply for whatever litre capacity of backpack you've got from the internet, and they're often sort of brightly coloured things that just elastically go over the backpack. They keep the rain off the backpack, but they also help you to be visible, so in an emergency situation. Now remember, there's no toilets, there's no litter bins on the mountains. If you do take tissue up, paper towels, that sort of thing, I suggest taking one of those little plastic Ziploc bags, because then you can put any waste in there and pack it out. So, no one likes to see paper fluttering around places. Now, when you're walking, you'll often want to stop somewhere, sit down, have a drink, have a sandwich. Now, again, down in the valleys, the grass might be nice and dry. Typically up on the mountains, it's soaking wet. There's rarely anything dry you can sit on. So I carry something to sit on, a bit of plastic, something that can be folded up small. I've actually got an offcut of membrane from, it's like sort of a thin membrane that's used in roofing projects. And I just it folds up small, open it up. It's something to sit on just to keep you from getting wet. If you want to hike in the ice or the snow, I strongly recommend some of these. There are various brands available. These are Kotula ice spikes. They stretch and they go over your walking boots, and underneath they've got these sharp, sturdy metal spikes, so they grip into the ice. But they also grip into grass as well. Once you put these on, you just feel unstoppable. So they're really worth purchasing if you're going to be in slippery conditions. The next thing to think about is emergency equipment. I know that seems a bit of overkill because you're probably going to be hiking somewhere quite popular, but it's quite easy to find yourself, you've gone off the sort of popular paths and you could be somewhere very quiet, and then the fog comes in, maybe you slip, you have an accident, no one comes past. You want some way of maybe summoning help, and you can't guarantee that you've got a mobile phone signal. Now we do actually carry, we've got an ePerb, which I'm not going to suggest you purchase, but you can. It's an emergency personal radio beacon. You can set it off. It's really for marine use, but you can register your details. You can set it off, and then it talks to satellites and says this is where you are, and talks to the emergency services. The other thing to consider, let's say obviously you want to make sure you've got a phone and you've got charging the phone. Consider having some sort of bright light, flashlight. And one thing I thought of the other day, which would be quite useful while we're in the Lake District, we had the mountain bikes with us, and I had one of those bright flashing lights, strobe lights that goes on the handlebars. And actually, that would be a very useful thing to take with you, because it's got a big battery. It's intensely powerful, and you can cycle it through different modes. So you can use it as just a torch to illuminate maps, or you can put it on strobe, and if you put it on strobe, people are going to see you from miles away. So very useful for summoning help. Also, a whistle is a good option. Some of the backpacks actually come with a whistle built in, or built into or attached to it, so that can be useful. Now, I said before, if you did get injured, if you end up sort of stuck someplace for any amount of time, you're going to get cold. You can get these cheap thermal blankets, so that can be a good thing to purchase. And they fold up very small, just like an aluminium blanket thing, so it's just an extra layer you can wrap around yourself. And also make sure you've got a compass and a map, a proper map, like here's an Ordnance Survey map, this type, which is the Explorer series, and you know how to use them. You don't want to rely on your mobile phone for this. It might not have signal, it might not have battery power, and the maps give you a bigger picture and give you very detailed information. Now, if you're doing the Lake Districts, I recommend getting the Wainwright guides. As you see, there's a whole section of them. Alfred Wainwright was a famous walker, and he penned these guides in, I guess it was the 1960s, did them all by hand, but they are absolutely stunning. So they have details of all the best routes up and down every peak, recommendations, illustrations of what they look like, the views you'll get when you're up there, and these still hold good. So absolutely stunning, and they're just a nice thing to have, as well as being practically very useful. There's a whole series of them covering different areas of the lakes. Now, if you haven't done, say, the big fells, big hills in the Lake District before, there is a temptation, I guess, to rush to the big popular ones, Helvellyn, Scafell Pike, for example. But I suggest, if you've not done this before, there are some really nice walks up some smaller peaks, beautiful views, and you'll get the feel for doing it without either scaring yourself or exhausting yourself straight off the bat. And similarly, some of these hikes can be quite technical, and actually they could be quite scary. So you could have long drops, you could have slippery surfaces, you could have nothing to hold on to. So a walk that starts off like a very easy gravel footpath that you could push a child's push chair along can, after a few miles, end up with almost a climb up a rock face. So again, it's worth reading up this in, say, the Wainwright books to decide whether this is a suitable first climb or first ascent for you, and then sort of working your way up to the more difficult stuff as you get a bit more experienced, just so, again, you don't scare yourself off and say, well, that's it, I'm not doing that again. Now, also do look at the weather forecast. There are sort of mountain weather forecasts available, and they will tell you the likelihood of cloud and weather is at the different altitudes. It can be a bit depressing to get up to a peak and then find that there's absolutely no view. You're just hiking in fog, effectively. But sometimes it's worth, if you can stay around there for a bit or drop down to have a cup of tea in some shelter and then come back up, you might find that some of it clears and you get a view. I've done this before, hiked up somewhere and said, oh, this is terrible, no view, hike down, get halfway down, you look back and the summit's in view. So don't rush to come down. Having said that, don't look to spend ages at the summits. They're often cold and windy. So, as you get cold, you're just losing energy. It's going to get more difficult for you to hike. The other thing is about the weather or the weather forecasts is I tend to look the day before, and I'll keep my plans flexible. I might choose in advance the things I want to do, but then I will choose when I do them based on what the weather's going to be. So if I look at the weather forecast tomorrow and it's good, I might do one of the big hills. If it's poor, I might say, look, I'm just going to stay around town. I'm going to do a museum or do some shopping, go to a cafe, for example. Now, rather than just starting on your hike and just following the signposts, etc., obviously what you should be doing is following your route on the map as you do it. So if you lose visibility, you know where you are at any point in time. And similarly, if you're using something like a GPS or a phone, just keep following it on the map so you know where you actually are. Because if those things fail, then you'll still know where you are and you'll be able to navigate your way onwards or back. Now, you can work out the length of the routes, again, from the Wainwright books, or if you look at here, there's little blue squares, and these squares are 1 kilometre. So you can sort of roughly measure how many kilometres your walk's going to take. But do remember that a kilometre on the flat is a heck of a lot easier than a kilometre on one of these hills or mountains where it's often at an angle, and actually going down hills is often worse, and it's rough surfaces. You've got to look at every single step. So don't be over ambitious and say, oh, I can do 18 kilometers easily at home, walking on the flat, and therefore that doesn't translate to what you could do in the hills. And as I say, do buy these books. They're about £8. There's several of them that cover the whole Lake District. And depending on where you are, you might have to take 2 of them on a hike if you're near a border. So I do recommend maybe watching a video or getting some training, but at least watch a video on how to use these maps with a compass. And compasses are cheap, small things, but it would make all the difference even if you're using a GPS or using a phone. If you get a whiteout and you lose power on that device, then you'll know how to be able to use that compass to orient the map, and you'll then be able to navigate yourself just with the map. Is a good skill to have. Now, the maps do have a key to what all these symbols mean. Again, you'll find videos on that sort of thing, or read the key to find out what the different symbols mean. But I will point out that these little red contour lines represent differences in level, and of course the closer the lines are together, the steeper that is. You can see where a path goes up a fairly steep slope, for example, or where it's almost flat. This will allow you to judge as well when you're planning your ascent, because one of the things I tend to find is that it's a lot easier to go up steep ascents because it's in front of you. You can use your hands if necessary. It's a lot more difficult going down them. You can hurt your knees, especially if you're getting a bit older like I am. So what I tend to do, if I'm working out a route in advance, I'll probably say, well, look, I'm going to do the steep route up, which might have some scrambling or climbing, get to the top, and then work out have the gentle route back down. That's also important because when you're doing the second half of your walk and you're going down, you might be a bit tired, it's a bit later in the day, and you're not concentrating, and this is when accidents can happen. So you sort of want it to be as easy as possible. Now, I mentioned GPS before. Most people, if they're using that, they've got it on their phone. If you're doing that, I would orient it, if you've got the option to be north, always facing upwards, not like your car GPS, which spins round to show you which direction you should go in. Because that way, if north is up, that's how it is on these maps, and it means that you will get an understanding of the terrain and its layout that will transfer to the map when you open the map. It's not all in different directions. And look, if you're navigating and you want to try and work out, hang on, that's north, but we're going that way, rotate the map. Don't feel bad about doing that. So rotate the map, rotate the GPS so that it aligns up with the territory. Now, I use a specialist Garmin handheld GPS unit. I use it for kayaking, rock climbing, all sorts of things. It's waterproof, it's IP67 rated, I think. It's a very strong unit, it's powerful, only got a very small screen. But one of the important features is it just takes regular AA batteries, which means wherever you can have a pocket full of spare batteries. And if you get short, if you're actually in a village or town anywhere in the world, you can buy additional batteries with you. You don't actually need to find somewhere to charge it for several hours. If you're relying on a phone, maybe think of taking one of those sort of charger packs with you so you can charge it as you go, because navigation, GPS facilities can use quite a lot of power, and especially if the backlight's on the phone all the time because you're navigating with it. So just bear that in mind. Now, if you do get a navigational issue, if you get lost or anything, and there are other hikers, please ask them. I mean, people up there are enthusiasts. They're really keen to give you advice and tell you, say, where are you going? Oh, yes, if you go down there. So please feel free to ask. Don't feel like you're being an idiot asking. It's the right thing to do. Another thing is when you get to the top of the peak, they're often windy, they're often cold. You might find it's actually better to step down a bit and find somewhere to sit to have your cup of tea or your sandwiches rather than sitting there on some windswept peak. So you can take a quick picture, then drop down a bit, get some refreshments. Also, when you're on the peak, because just take a note of which direction you came from to get there and which direction you have to go to come off, because you could find yourself dropping off because you go up there, you look at various markers, you take pictures in different directions, you have a chat, you have a cup of tea, and then you're like, oh, which way do we go to get down? maybe you're doing a circular walk, maybe you're going back down the same way, but it's easy to get disoriented, especially if the clouds have come in and then you don't know which way you're supposed to go, and you could actually end up dropping off the wrong side of the mountain and having a real navigational disaster, and that could be absolutely miles from where you started and parked your car. Now, one thing that can be quite tempting when you're on a hike, you're coming down somewhere, you might say, oh, actually, I'm not going to take that. There's a shortcut here. I can cut this corner. So be very careful about that. One, you can find yourself on the wrong side of a fence and then you've got to climb over a fence. Secondly, you can find there's big areas of boggy ground, and there's a lot of boggy ground even on the top of these peaks. It's very squelchy and you don't want to find yourself waist deep in bog. You know, apart from being embarrassing and wet, you're going to stay cold for the rest of your rest of your hike. A good thing to do would be to carry a spare set of dry socks with you just in case that sort of thing happens. The other more critical issue is if you go off the path, is you try to find this shortcut, is that you'll see a lot of these hills will just roll off. You can't see where they're going. They get steeper and steeper, and the grass can do this, and then you can get a vertical cliff. You can get like an overhang. So it can be very dangerous. You're thinking, oh, it's a nice gentle grass slope. We'll just walk there. That goes where we want. And then you find yourself at the top of a cliff. And the temptation then is to try and work your way around and get down this dangerous cliff, because no one wants to walk all the way back up that hill again. So try and avoid that sort of shortcut if you can. So logistics. I suggest if it's somewhere like the Lake District, and this also applies to North Wales, get out early. So get out early in the morning, get yourself a parking space, because people tend to assume, oh, there'll be loads of parking, there'll be proper car parks. There's not. There's often a few pull-ins by the side of the road, and by sort of 9:30, 10 a.m. they might all be completely full. So we often found a situation where we'll get somewhere at sort of 7:30, 8 in the morning, park up, there's maybe one other car. When we come down, it might be late morning and the limited parking is full. You've got to bear in mind that the weather often starts out nice very early in the morning and then gets a bit worse later. So you want to be using that nice weather. So I do see a lot of people sort of wait until they've had a late breakfast, and then because they're on holiday, so take their time, and then they get there and it's a nightmare finding parking. And also the best weather's gone. So it's 8 a.m, it's blue skies. At 9:30 there's the odd cloud appearing. By 11 o'clock it's fully clouded over, and then it might be in the early afternoon it starts raining. So you can miss the best of the day. Also, more worryingly, I do see people, I might be coming down off a big hike at sort of 3:30, 4 in the afternoon, and I see people coming up. They've maybe come from the local town and thinking, oh, it's nice afternoon, we'll just start this, and just go higher and higher and higher, often in inappropriate clothing, and not realising quite how far they're going to have to go to actually get anywhere, and you're just starting at the wrong time of the day, often the hottest time of the day. Now, I said about parking, pull-ins at the side of the road, but bear in mind, many of the roads are single track, so they're only one car wide or slightly more than one car wide, and they have these passing places that you can pull into, but this is for people to pull in temporarily to let traffic park, so do not park in those passing spaces. Where there are official car parks, and there are often some at low level sort of around the lakes, they are getting expensive. So you can easily pay £9 a day for these. I tend to keep a lot of £1 coins in a bag in the car just for this, because you can't guarantee that they're going to have contactless payment. Maybe they have an app, maybe that app doesn't work. You find it requires an app you don't have, and you're trying to download and sign up to some app and give it your credit card details. It's a real pain. So actually having some cash just in case is quite useful. Now, I mentioned the single track lanes with passing places. And what this does mean is that, well, firstly, you need to drive slowly, because you can have oncoming traffic coming towards you. You may need to stop at any point and reverse backwards. So if the oncoming traffic is a queue of cars, they're not going to be able to stop and reverse back, or they might be a farm vehicle with a trailer. So you need to be someone who can reverse your car back and get it into a tight space. So something worth thinking about if you've never driven single track lanes before. You're also likely to come across a lot of cattle grids, because the cattle can roam free in a lot of areas in the national parks. Cattle grids are fine to drive over, so they're not going to damage your car. They're not an indication that you're not allowed to go there. It's just to keep the cattle one side of the cattle grid, so they won't step through the gaps with their hooves. But you can drive through it perfectly well in your car. Probably best not to go flying through at high speed, but don't worry, it's safe. It's not going to damage your car. Refreshments. You'll need to carry some water because you're likely to be hiking up hills. You're going to be sweating. You're going to be going through that water quickly. I'd carry a good litre of water. If it's colder weather, think about maybe a thermos flask of tea. If you do that, because it really does make a difference. If you have to stop somewhere, it's really bad weather, you're getting really cold, it really does help to warm you up. Make sure, though, it's one of those metal thermos flasks. It's not the old style ones with glass on the inside, because no one wants to, having knocked their backpack against some rock faces, no one wants to get it out and shake it and it's all rattly with full of broken glass. So I mentioned before the way that a footpath can change from being something that you could push a pushchair along to something that ends up being a scramble up a rock face. I also mentioned the fantastic Wainwright guides. But you do have to remember, Wainwright walks like every inch of the Lake District. So he was an expert. And that does mean that his idea of what might be an easy walk and your idea might not be quite the same. So just take it with a pinch of salt. If he says, this might be a little bit tricky, think that it's actually probably quite difficult. On that topic, you do often have to scramble up rocks. So we're not talking about proper rock climbing involving, ropes and axes and stuff like that. We're just talking about using your hands to get up there. One trick that my climbing instructor told me, which was very useful, was firstly, take small steps if you can, because if you take a small step, you'll often suddenly see a handhold or another step become available to you that wasn't visible just a few inches below. Also, it means you're not putting too much strain on your joints when doing that, and you can actually move faster in smaller increments than if you're taking great big steps. The other one is, he also said, was look around. So the logical next step might be behind you over here or over there, or you might have to shuffle around a bit and just find an easier step. And again, these things may not be obvious from a bit further down, but when you get to that point, you can suddenly see, actually, rather than trying to go up this gully in front of me, if I turn around there and go up that way, I've got an easier route. So do look around. Also, don't rush. This is not a competition. You want to take in the views, you want to enjoy it, and actually you will probably get there quicker if you don't rush, because people who rush are more likely to slip and have accidents. I've seen this. I've seen this on Table Mountain in Cape Town, and also you just tire yourself out and you have to keep stopping more frequently. Again, I've seen this sort of in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. People go rushing off. Look, I can overtake this person, and then you come across them and they're there, out of breath, struggling, sweating, and you just gently carry on past them. Now, it sounds obvious, but look where you're stepping. You're not on tarmac or concrete. It's uneven surfaces, often the rocks, even if they look firm, they might wobble. They can be slippery surfaces. So it is tempting. You're in beautiful places to keep sort of looking around while you're walking. Probably best, so you don't break or twist an ankle, is to focus on where you're walking, and then every few steps stop and then look around, take a picture, rather than trying to walk as you film or take a picture. And I mentioned it before, take even more care going downhill. It is so much easier to slip and injure yourself going downhill. The last thing you want is finding that you've badly twisted an ankle 1,000 meters up and 8 kilometers or 5 kilometers from the car. It's going to be a real struggle getting back down. I almost never find any risk of injuring myself going up something. It's always coming down something. This is especially true because a lot of these, even paths that look quite good, have got pebbles on them that are like ball bearings. They can be very slippery. So, again, do not rush because you can end up slipping and injuring yourself. As well as using a stick when descending those steep gravelly paths, to prevent yourself slipping, another tip that I've found is to look out for little or slightly larger irregular shaped stones in the path and try and step on those because they'll dig into the path and will stop you, rather than you stepping on the sort of very rounded shingly stones which will just slide down the path. So that helps you avoid having an accident when descending. Buy yourself a trekking pole. They're dirt cheap, don't need anything fancy, but they mean that you've got an extra pair of hands on a slippery surface. You know, you can reach out somewhere and just keep yourself balanced, especially if you're on some sort of like knife edge thing and really you need to use hands as well as feet. Also, a big reason for having them is if you start going downhill, you can extend it a bit. You can sort of almost reach in front to help brake you. So all that braking effort isn't going on your knees, because you know that can get really hard on the knees. So they telescope. So one, you can adjust the length for your height and for whether you're going uphill, which means shorter, or going downhill, you want to reach more ahead. And also they'll shorten down to maybe that, so they'll fit in your backpack. So you know they're good for storage. A lot of the cheaper ones come with like a shock absorber system, so you can click it and it's got springs, and unclick it and it's solid. I don't bother with any of that. I find that useless. You just want something that's solid, and I like one which is quite heavily built. I can use it just in the countryside in general, bash back some stinging nettles. It's just really handy to have a stick. They typically all have like a sharpened metal tip for going into the ground. I mean, it's good on many surfaces, but they also come usually with a sort of like a rubber foot that you can put on the end. I guess that's for pavement. I never use that. I think there's some up here. They're probably still in their original bag. They also come with a screw-on piece which distributes the pressure and prevents it going in too deep. So it's just like a sort of a flatter piece, maybe that size. And that's useful because in deeper mud, otherwise it'll just go all the way down. And obviously it's useful in snow. In fact, looking at this one, there's an optional large one there for, I guess, use in snow. Now, one place where a trekking pole is also very useful is in scree. Scree slopes are horrible. You'll see them marked on a map. There's a specific, it's like lots of little round circles clustered together to represent the fact that they are a series of small to large boulders. It's like a boulder field, often at sort of like 45 degrees. It's at whatever the maximum angle you can stack boulders is. And it's pretty horrible. All these boulder fields, there's no obvious path often in scree. It just sort of disappears. And because the boulders move all the time, and you're sort of trying to balance and not slip over. So and coming down scree is really awkward, and that's where you've got to be careful, because you can just, it's like ball bearings, you can just end up in sort of like an avalanche of scree and come down. So you've got to be so careful coming down. So that's probably all I can think of for now. One last thing to talk about is livestock. Bear in mind that on the lower fields there may be cattle. On the higher fields there's undoubtedly sheep. Gates will be probably left closed to ensure sheep don't escape. So make sure you reclose them properly afterwards and you latch them properly. The latching on gates can be all over the place. You know, sometimes it's a piece of string or rope tight which you have to loop back over. Often they don't, you know, you have to sometimes put a bit of attention in to make sure they latch properly. You don't want a farmer's sheep escaping from where they should be. If you've got a dog, keep it under control. Your dog might be absolutely fine normally at home, but amongst livestock, unless it's very used to it, you don't know. And generally the rule is keep a dog on the lead. The last thing you want is a dog getting out and worrying some sheep, causing them to miscarry, or even worse, attacking some sheep, and they can leave appalling injuries. And we've worked with sheep before, and we know the sort of injuries you can get from dogs. So having said all that, hopefully it didn't frighten you off any of this. It's really just to give you some thoughts as to how to prepare yourself and make sure you've got the stuff you need to make sure it's an enjoyable experience, whatever the weather. And then you're not having to find yourself, oh, I've got the wrong stuff, I've hurt myself, I've got lost, I've got blisters, I'm uncomfortable. You can actually do what you're supposed to do up in the hills. That's just really enjoy the day out, take some nice photographs, spend some time with friends, and just enjoy the beautiful scenery. Okay, well, hope that gets you out into the countryside. Right, enjoy your time out there. See ya.